Hi everyone, this is the first Tableau workshop. To follow along with this workshop, you're just going to need two different files. The first one is this Eller Tableau Workshop 1 Tableau file. It'll be a .twbx. And then the second file you're going to need is this Excel file called Eller Tableau Workshop 1 Data. So, in this workbook, we've already built out the different sheets we're going to use both for the first workshop and the second workshop. The first workshop, we're going to work through these blue colored tabs down here at the bottom. And so if your workbook opened, like starting on this top 5 companies sheet, I think, you can just scroll left or right to see these different sheets. And so the first two, these red ones, are just an introduction to what this data set is and some of the terminology for navigating Tableau if you haven't ever used it before, which I'm guessing is the case for most of you watching this video. And then we're going to work through creating visuals using the steps on these different sheets here, these blue colored ones. Then in the second workshop, we'll start on these yellow ones. So the blue ones are more basic, the yellow ones a little bit more involved, how to take something basic and take it to the next level. And for this data set, I just want to point out that this data set is split across two different sheets. So it's about the top 5,000 fastest growing companies in the US from the year 2014. And if you're used to using Excel, you might remember that in Excel you'd have to use different commands to match up things across these two different sheets. But a nice thing with Tableau is it's going to be able to do that for us. So the first thing to get started is just to tell Tableau that we want to use that Excel file. And so to do that, we're going to go to this data source tab. And if you ever open a brand new Tableau, not one where there's already stuff created, where you'll start is this data source tab. And so where we're going to go to is either connect to Microsoft Excel. You can click on that, or you can go up to File and then Open. Either of those is going to work. I'm going to click on Microsoft Excel. And we're going to browse for where did we put that Excel file. So I've got this one right here, Excel Tableau Workshop 1 Data, and I'll say open. It'll think for a second, and then it should take you to a page that looks like this. And so over on the left-hand side is where we see those two different sheets that we had in our Excel. And there's this little box here that says Use Data Interpreter. Now, there are times where you don't check that box and everything will work fine. But I've had enough times where I haven't checked that box, stuff didn't work that I tried to make later. And so just go ahead and always check that Use Data Interpreter box. What that's going to do is Tableau is going to go through all the different columns in your Excel and try and figure out what type of data is in those columns and that sort of thing. So just check that Use Data Interpreter box. Again, it's going to think for a second. If a little window pops up, don't hit cancel or anything like that. Just let it finish thinking. And then eventually it'll show Cleaned with Data Interpreter. And then to use these sheets, which we want both of them in this case, all we're going to do is just drag each of them over to this drag tables here. So I'm going to take my financial information, drag that over, and you'll see it populates all the stuff that was on that financial information sheet. And then I'm going to say I want to also join that with this general company information. So I'm going to take that one, drag it over, and it gives me this warning here. So this little indicator and this pop-up are saying Tableau didn't automatically recognize how do we want to join these two sheets. What's the same thing that they both share? Well, they both share this unique identifier. And so in this first one, I'm just going to click unique identifier. And then in my second sheet, I'm going to also find unique identifier. And then now it knows, okay, match up based on those. And I think the reason why it didn't automatically join is it thought this one was categorical. That's why it has a little blue symbol next to it. And it thought this one over here was numeric. That's why it has a green symbol. And we'll talk more about that in a second. But we can always change that. But I think that's why this one didn't automatically recognize that the identifiers were the same thing on each sheet. Once we've done that, you'll see there's no more warning anymore. If you ever want to edit how these two different sheets are joined, you can click back on this little line of the join between them, and you can again change what field it's using to join these on. And every version of Tableau is a little bit different. Sometimes all that stuff happens in the bottom left corner. Sometimes it's a pop-up. It just depends on what version you have. So on this window, before we go into our sheets, a couple little things that we can see is, well, one, if I want to click between these sheets, I can to see each of the information on the sheets. And then Tableau has gone ahead and tried to figure out, okay, what type of variables are each of these columns. So you can see like company name, it recognized as text. That's why it has ABC. And then it's also got green for discrete or blue for discrete and green for continuous, which is saying, okay, so these aren't like stuff we would do math with. Same thing here, we're on, if one of these general information, I think is that blue? That's green. Well, if these were blue, it's saying, okay, even though it's a number, you wouldn't want to do math with it. It's more like a label, and so that would be discrete. And if you ever want to change anything about these, you can click these drop downs here to edit some stuff with them. You can also click that symbol to edit the type, whether it's just string or dates or numbers or what. And so you'll see over on like general information, we have some other ones. We've got these globe icons for locations. Anytime you want to make maps in Tableau, you're going to need some locations. But we'll see all that again on our first sheet. So now that we've got our data put in here, let's just go over to this mapping filled sheet, this first blue tab. And so all we're going to do here is we're going to make a map where each state is filled in with a darker fill, meaning more revenue coming from that state by whatever companies are located in that state. So let's get kind of comfortable with this interface first. So over on the left, we've got all of our different variables, and you'll see here's all the stuff from the financial information sheet. Here's all the stuff for the general information sheet. And again, it's split into, okay, these blue ones are discrete, the green ones are continuous. And then another very useful thing to see is this Show Me button in the top right. If you click on that, it has all these preset types of visuals that Tableau will make for you if you just tell it what you want to use. So a filled map is one of these, and that's what we're going to use. And you can see down at the bottom of this drop-down, it says that for a filled map, we need at least one geographic dimension. Sorry, dimension is their term for the blue stuff, and green is the measures. So we need at least one dimension that's geographic. Then we can put in other dimensions if we want, and we can have either 0 or 1 measure. So if we didn't have a measure, all the states would be filled the exact same color. If we put in a measure, it'll fill them on a gradient based on their numeric value of that measure. So let's tell Tableau what we want to use. So I'm just going to take things that we want to use and put them up here into either columns or rows. If you're building your own visual, it matters whether you drag things to columns or drag them to rows. But if you're going to use Show Me, it doesn't matter. Tableau is going to know, okay, let's use those things. When you're building your own visuals, think of columns as the x-axis, rows as the y-axis for your visual. For this one, let's just take our state L. It's the full name of the state. It's like Arizona would say the full word Arizona instead of AZ. And we're going to drag that up. It doesn't matter if you put it in columns or rows. Over in the steps I put rows, so we'll put it in rows here. And then let's say we want to see the revenue per state. Well, then I'll take revenue and I'll put that in the other shelf. These are called the columns and rows shelves. So since I put state into rows, I'll put revenue up here into columns. And at first it just builds a bar graph. That's the default visual for one dimension and one measure. But now if I go to Show Me, and you can see now a bunch of stuff is colored in saying we can make those things, I'm going to click on this filled map picture saying I want to make one of these filled maps. And then once you've done that, I'm just going to click Show Me again to minimize that drop down. Okay, so first, before we look at this map, notice that when we put revenue up here, and then also when Tableau turned it into being located in this little color button right here, both times it had revenue defaulted to sum. And anything numeric in Tableau is going to default to being a sum unless you change that. Now, there's two options for that. If I want revenue to always be averaged in every visual that I want to make, I could do that over here on my list of variables. I could click this revenue drop down. I could say default properties, and then I can go to aggregation, and I could change this to always be averaged or minimum or whatever. If you only want to change it for one instance, like just in this case, if we wanted to see average revenue instead of total revenue from a state, I could click the drop down for this pill right here, the one associated with color. That's why it has these 4 colored dots that match this color button. Then I could go to measure and change it to average. I'm going to keep mine as a sum. I think it makes sense to look at total revenue coming from a state, but if you want to see average revenue from a state, that makes sense as well, so feel free to change it to average. Now, something with these filled maps is I don't usually like to show Alaska, Hawaii, Puerto Rico if it shows up in the data set, just because I feel like usually you want to zoom in on the continental U.S. I think that losing those 3 observations is worth having the continental U.S. be a much bigger map for the space. So I'm going to tell it to hide those 3 states. So to do that, all I'm going to do is take that state L variable again. I'm going to drag it and drop it in this little filters box here. And then I can uncheck stuff from this list. So I can say, I don't want to see Alaska, I don't want to see Hawaii, and I don't want to see Puerto Rico. And we could always add those back in if we decide we want to see them. But just for the sake of presentation, I think something like this, where it's filled in, looks a lot better. Now, another thing that I like to change for filled maps specifically is to not see all this background behind it, all the like Mexico territories and the Canada territories and stuff. So what I'm going to do is if we go up here to this map drop down and go to map layers, then for this background here, one, note that you could change the style of that background if you wanted it to look way different, like dark or something. Some people like keeping the background in, but at least for me, I like to change this washout from 0% all the way to 100%. So completely wash out the background and just see the filled in states. I think that looks cleaner. If you disagree, keep it how you want. And notice that you can also customize what you see on the map if you keep that background in there. Once you're happy with that, you just hit this little X to close out of that map layers window. And one thing that's a little bit weird with Tableau at first is that we don't ever say like OK or apply or anything like that. We just make the change and then close out of it. It automatically happens. So I'm just going to click that X to then see all my variables again. Okay, so let's make this thing a little bit more informative. So I might want to know, well, which state are these without having to cursor over them? So you'll see here in this marks card, there's these other things, color, size, label, detail, and tooltip. Those are buttons that you can drag variables to customize this visual even more. And you'll also notice that right now in this dropdown, we're on the map tools. We could click that drop down to change to other types of tools. It'll mess your map up here. It won't be a map anymore. But just note that they all have slightly different buttons to make those different types of visuals. Now, to display information on this thing, we have 2 options. One is the tooltip, which is what pops up when you hover over. So like right now I've got state L, the long name of the state, and total summed revenue in the tooltips. But what if I want to always see the state names? Well, that would be label. Label always shows up, not just in the hover. And it probably makes sense to use the abbreviated state name like CA or AZ, that sort of thing, to put on here so it doesn't take up a ton of space. So I'm going to take state S for short name and drag that to label. And then now you'll see it puts the short names on here. And in my tooltip, it puts both. Because now state S is something that got added to my visual, and anything I add to this visual automatically gets included in the tooltip unless I tell it otherwise. We'll talk about the tooltip more in a second. Another thing that I might want to see is how many companies are in each one of these states. That way I can start looking for patterns. I can say, okay, what's a state that has high revenue for relatively low number of companies, or what's a state that has low revenue for high number of companies, that sort of thing. I can start looking at that relationship on this map. And so notice right now we don't have a company count variable anywhere. So that's something we're going to have to make. And we do that using what's called a calculated field. And there's a few different ways that we can do that. So one is we can do like what it says in the steps here. We can right click on the company name dimension, and then we could say create calculated field. That's one option. You can just right click in this white space over here on a mat, control click instead of right click, and say create calculated field. Or you can go up to analysis and then create calculated field. Any of those take you to the same place. I'm going to call this calculated field company count. And then we're just going to type a formula in here. And unlike something like Excel, you don't need an equals. It knows that when you start typing in here, you're typing a formula. And you'll see if I start typing, so I just typed CO, it shows me a list of all the different things that I could put in here that have the letters CO in them. So the functions are all these little F's here. Any variables it's going to have labeled there, so like company name, that's a string measure, or dimension, sorry, is listed here. It's even got a sheet name in here. So anything I could possibly reference, it has in here. So I'm going to keep going and type count D or find count D from the list. And D is for distinct. Basically, if the same company is measured multiple times, like I don't know, different months or something in 2014, we only want it to show up one time. We only wanted to count them once, not 12 times. So I'm going to click on Count D, and it's important that you click stuff from that list so that it fills in with colored text. If you just typed out Count D, didn't click something from the drop-down, it's not going to work. And then inside parentheses, I'm going to get that company name variable here. So company name, again, click from the list, it should fill in orange, and then it tells me this calculation is valid, and so I know that this one's gonna work. And then we can say okay, and notice that made this new variable over here. It has a very small equal sign to the left of it, meaning that this was a calculated field that was created. And so then now what I'm going to do is I'm going to also take company count and put that on my label. And so now we can see each state, how many companies are in there. And so it makes sense. Okay, California had the most companies. They also, based on the darkness of being shaded, seem to have the most total revenue. Texas seemed like the second, and so on. But then we could look for patterns. So, for example, Washington has 107 companies, but their revenue is lower than like Minnesota or Wisconsin, some of these ones that had less count of companies. And so you can start to look for things like that. Now, something to keep in mind when you're doing Tableau is always kind of think about what the user is going to see in the presentation that you're going to have at the end. And so you don't need to do this always right at the start, but before you ever publish this, things you want to think about is, so for example, does everything that should have units on it have units? And so, well, right now, no, revenue, that should have a dollar sign on it. And I don't see a dollar sign on it. There's a few ways that you could change that. One is you could click on this tooltip button and manually put a dollar sign in front of that reference. But what's a much cleaner way to do that, especially since I'm going to want to always have a dollar sign on revenue, is I can go to revenue over here and format it to have a dollar sign in front of it. If you didn't want to do it always, if you only wanted it for the instance of this visual, you could do it right here. You could go here and say format and then change it to be a dollar sign. I'll show how in a second. But I want to do this all the time. So for all my sheets, I don't have to keep changing it to show dollar signs on revenue. So I'm going to go to revenue over here on my list of variables, click the drop down, and we'll again go to default properties. This time I'll go to number format. And then what I want to do is I want this to be a currency, and I want to do custom because standard is going to default to 2 decimal places. And when we're dealing with trillions of dollars, we don't care about pennies. I usually only show pennies if it's like in the tens or ones. Once I'm to the hundreds, I usually don't show decimals anymore. So currency custom is going to let me get rid of the decimals. So if I go to currency custom and then say 0 decimal places, notice it automatically fills in a $sign for the prefix. So in front of the number, it's going to have a $sign. You could always change that to a different currency if you wanted to by putting in a different symbol there. Also note that you could go to number custom and just type in a $sign. Currency custom just fills in that $sign for you. And then I'll say OK. And then now we've got our $sign there. And I don't know if you guys noticed there, but when I was in that menu, so let me go back there real quick, it even has things like, do we want commas to separate the thousands and that sort of thing. So pretty much anything that you want to customize in Tableau, there's a way to customize it. Almost everything I've ever wanted to customize, I've eventually found a way to do. Sometimes it's kind of hidden or hard to find, but if you want something to look a certain way, it's almost for sure a possibility. Okay, now let's say I don't want to see both Texas and TX, or New Mexico and NM when I cursor over this. I could go to state S right here, this little drop down, and then I'm just going to uncheck include in tooltip. So it'll keep it as a label there, but now in the tooltip, I don't have to worry about seeing it. So just again, making my visual a little bit cleaner. Okay, so I think that this one is good to go. And again, for this first workshop, we're just going to be looking at some of the basic visualizations, nothing crazy yet, just the sort of basic stuff you can make with Tableau. So this is a field map, one that I think is very useful. And just because they're basic doesn't mean that they're not worth much. A lot of the really nice visualizations that you see, which I'll show a little bit at the end, some examples of, they use a lot of basic visualizations. They just spend a lot of time with layouts and format once they've made those visualizations. Okay, so our next one is this horizontal bar chart. This one's going to be super fast because the default for Tableau when you use a dimension and a measure is a bar graph. So that's easy. So let's look at how many companies there are per industry. So now since we're making this one, we're not using the show me button, it will matter what I drag to columns and what I drag to rows, just for the orientation of my bar graph. So again, think of columns as your x-axis, rows as your y-axis. And so you need to decide, do you want horizontal bars or vertical bars? And if you pick the wrong one, it's really easy to flip it. There's just this one button up here that I'll show you. But I'm going to do horizontal bars. And so I'm going to drag industry up here to rows. And then I'm going to take that company count calculated field that we made, put that one into columns, and then I get a bar graph showing me how many companies were in each industry. Let's say you make that and you're like, actually, I'd rather see a vertical bar. Then there's this button right here that swaps between rows and columns. You can click that. Oh, now there's vertical bars. Oh, back to horizontal bars. It's really easy to flip stuff around if you didn't like the way it looked. I like the horizontal bars here. I think they fit a little bit better. And then again, all we're going to do now is make this thing look nicer. So first, let's sort this thing. Now, there's a manual sort, so I can go up here to industry and either right click or click this drop down and go to sort. And what this lets me do is, if I don't want to just sort based on like largest bar to smallest bar, I could do different things here. So like I could sort by revenue or workers, something that wasn't even in this bar graph yet. That would be by field. I can do alphabetical. I can manually move all these things around. Data source order is the automatic one. And if you want to do just data source order, you don't even need to go into here. There's these buttons right here. So there's ascending and descending. So I'll just click this descending button. But just note that you can do much more customized sortings by going to the drop down for that pill. It has to be a dimension, so one of the blue pills, and then going to sort. And so then The other things I might want to do, so with bar graphs, you can kind of already tell, okay, environmental services has around 50 companies, and so on. Like, you can kind of eyeball it from this axis here. But to me, I think that it takes a little bit longer to identify information on here by having to either cursor over the bars to see the company count or to eyeball it from this axis. So what I like to do with bar graphs usually is put the count as a label, so it's on the end of the bars here. So you can see if we take company count and drop that on label, it shows me the company count for each of these. And then now I don't really need to see this horizontal axis here anymore because I can see the exact count. This is just unnecessary clutter. And I like to make my visuals look as simple and clean as possible. So then once I have that on there, I don't need this axis. I can right click on it or on a Mac control click and just uncheck show header to get rid of that. And then I also might want to get rid of these lines here. Now, those can sometimes be a pain to find. Let's see how quick we can do it here. So if you ever want to get rid of lines behind a graph, if you just right click somewhere in that blank space of the graph, or again on a Mac control click and go to format, then in format, there's this little lines icon up here. And I think that these are in columns and then grid lines. Let's try it. So grid lines, I'll say none. Nice. If we'd flipped this graph, then this axis that has lines associated with it would have been rows, and so I would have gone to rows instead. But if you ever aren't sure and want to make a line go away, just come in here and start changing lines to none until they go away. If I want this bottom line to go away too, let's try and find that one. So it wasn't the zero lines, wasn't reference, maybe it was the axis ruler. There. So axis ruler got rid of that bottom line as well. And then other things for me with graphs is I don't like when they have these dot dot dots, meaning that something didn't fit. So I might try and expand this a little bit to make everything fit and not see those dot dot dots. I think that looks a little bit better. So that's something I'm always looking for whenever I'm making a finished, polished product in Tableau is I don't want to see a dot 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 at the end of text. And so I try and make everything fit where I can. Okay, so I think that's everything for this bar graph. Now you can do a lot with bar graphs. We're just making a basic one now. We'll come back to this and revisit this bar graph in the next workshop and look at how we can do a lot more stuff with this. Okay, next basic visual we can make is a scatterplot. Again, this one's a very fast one to make because a scatterplot's the default visual for Tableau when you use two measures, two numeric continuous sort of variables. And so here, I want to look at, is there a relationship between number of workers a company has and the revenue that they have? And so I'm going to, again, decide how do I want this graph laid out. I want to see workers across the x-axis, revenue on the y. And so I'm going to take workers and put that in columns. I'm going to take revenue, put that in rows. And it starts out just giving me one dot. Everything is put together in there instead of showing me by company, because right now Tableau doesn't know that I want to see it per company. I have to tell it that. And so there's two ways that you can do this. One is if you go to analysis, you can uncheck aggregate measures and it'll just make separate dots, but it still won't know that company is what's associated with those. And so while you can go to analysis and uncheck aggregate measures, I don't think it's the best way to do this. What I like to do is I like to choose, okay, what do I want to see a separate dot for? In this case, I want to see a separate dot for each company. So I'm going to take company name and drag that here to detail. And now it knows to separate out and have a separate dot for each company. And the reason I like to do that is now company name is associated with this scatter plot. If I didn't do that, it would only know workers and revenue for each dot. And so if I want to later have actions where I cursor over a company name somewhere and it highlights that company's dot on the scatter plot or something, it already knows which company goes with each dot. Also, when I cursor over a dot, it shows me the company name already in the tooltip. whereas it wouldn't have done that otherwise. Okay, what else might we want to see in this tooltip? So we already see the companies. We also might want to see the industry. So let me take industry, drag that to tooltip as well, and now I can see what industry they're in as well. If you wanted to change the order that things show up in the tooltip, you can. To do that, let's say for some reason I wanted to see workers before revenue. I don't know why you would. I like this order already. Let's just say you wanted to see workers and then revenue. If I actually click on this tooltip button, it comes up with this little menu where I can edit the tooltip. And in our more advanced workshop after this one, we'll see some extra things you can do here, how you can add some cool stuff into the tooltip. But if you just want to move stuff around or change the colors or the font or anything, you can do all that here. It's got a lot of the normal word processor tools. I can just take workers, I can highlight this whole line for workers, cut it, so Control X or Command X on a Mac. I'll put an extra line in here above revenue, paste, so Control V or Command V, and now I've got workers before revenue. You could make stuff be bolded, you could make it be red font, whatever you want to do, you can make all those sort of changes here. And then when you say OK, notice now workers is shown before revenue. Okay, next one we're going to look at is instead of having a map filled in on states, we're going to have a point map or a dot map where we have dots at the location of cities, for example. And so this one's going to be very similar to the filled map to start off. I still need to know my state, so I'll take state L and drag that up here. But I also want to know what city. And while you could just take city up here without state, and it will make a dot map, it typically is going to have a lot more unknown locations if you do just city. Because, for example, Springfield, there's a bunch of states that have a Springfield. And so if you had a Springfield in the data set, Tableau doesn't know which Springfield you're referring to. So if you put state up here with city, then all those ambiguous city names that Tableau doesn't know which one you're referring to, it now does. And then with those, I also want to see the revenue. So I'm going to take revenue and drag that to rows. Now with a dot map, when we make this, whatever numeric thing we've put up here is going to determine the size of the dot. Remember with our filled map, the numeric thing we chose determined the darkness of the color on our map. Now it's going to determine the size. We can still add color to it though, and I'll show that here in a second. But once I've got these things up here, now we go back to show me. This time I'm going to do a dot map. So I'll click on that one. Again, let it think for a second. And then it should fill in something like this. And again, we can filter out Alaska, Hawaii, and Puerto Rico to zoom in more. So I'll take state L to filters. I'll uncheck Alaska, Hawaii, and Puerto Rico. Say OK. Zooms in on the continental US. Now, a lot of these dots look pretty small right now. We'll talk about how to change that. First thing I want to point out is that it's got this 37 unknowns down here. So even though we included the state with the city, there's still 37 locations in the data set that it didn't know. If you click on that button and go to edit locations, it'll show you all the ones that it didn't know. And if you want to, and if you only have a few unknowns, what you can do is you can look these up. You can Google some of these and try and figure out where they are. A lot of times they're just really small and Tableau doesn't recognize them, and so you can change them to be the name of a city that's near to that city. So like, let's say I looked up Black Creek and it was near Chicago or something. I don't know where this is. I could click on this unrecognized. I could start typing a city name and have it put the dot at the location of the city that I've typed in here. I'm just going to leave these. 37 is a lot for us to go through and edit. And also notice some of them there's like this city of industry that it's got in there incorrectly. If you're wanting to mess with all these, you can. You can also just right click on this and say hide indicator so no one knows that you have 37 unknowns. Okay, other things here. Now, remember with our last map, we hid the background. We probably don't want to do that here because then we're just going to see dots. We don't know where they're located. But if you want, you can change the way that your map background looks. So again, if I go to my map layers, maybe you don't like this light style. I've seen a lot of people that like the dark one. And then they change their dots to be brighter colored. A lot of people like this outdoors one. There's a lot of different styles for these maps, and again, you can change the color of the dots as well to make it stand out more on whatever map you choose. I am a fan of just the normal light one, but go with whatever style you like. And then another thing that, for me, I feel like most people looking at this know this is the United States, and so I feel like seeing the word United States here is unnecessary clutter, and so I'm just going to uncheck state, or not state, I need to uncheck country region names, and that'll go away. And then again, once you're happy with it, you can click this little X to close out. Okay. So, another thing that I didn't mention on the last map that I'll mention here that I like to do with maps is, so once you're happy with the map, you've got it positioned the way you want to and everything zoomed how you want, I like to turn off the ability for the user to pan and zoom on the map so that they don't mess it up. I can't tell you how many times I've either been looking at someone's dashboard or I've had my own dashboard that I've been using later, and I'm trying to scroll down on the page. My cursor goes over one of the maps, and instead it just zooms out the map. It doesn't scroll down the page anymore. Now I've messed up the map too and can't see what it originally looked like. And so I like to disable that ability. So if you go to this map drop down again and go to map options, then we can uncheck allow pan and zoom, and we can also uncheck this view toolbar here so that it's not, again, unnecessary stuff that the user's having to see. I like to leave the search bar in case they want to search for a specific thing. Okay, let's say I want to change the size of these dots so that the smaller dots are a little bit bigger maybe. If you go to this little size legend over here and click the drop down arrow in the top right corner of it, we can go to edit sizes. And so you can just do automatically and just make them all bigger, but you'll see if I do that and hit apply, the small dots still stay really small. Maybe that's what you want. Maybe you just want a lot of discrepancy between large and small dots. But if you want to be able to change how small the smallest dots are as well, instead of this automatically, we're going to go to by range, and then notice now I have a slider on the lower end for the smallest dots and the upper end for the biggest dots. And if you move these just a little bit and then say apply, it has pretty drastic changes. So I'd only move a little bit at a time and then say apply. And then once you're kind of happy with it, you can say OK. Right now these dots look kind of overlapped, but once I add color, I think these sizes will look a lot better. So I'm going to go ahead and say OK. I'll also go ahead and mention with the sizing of the dots that unless you have it on automatically, where here I did by range, if I then put this map over on a dashboard and the space allocated to the map on that dashboard is smaller than this space, the dots don't do a very good job of sizing down to fit that new space. And so what might look like the right sizing of the dots here might look way too large when you move this to a dashboard later. And so you can always come back and edit the sizes later too to see how they look on whatever dashboard you're trying to put this on. Okay, now with the maps, it's nice to see the size of the dots based on their location to see, okay, where are the companies with the biggest circles, meaning the most revenue, located. But I also like to see other things on here as well based on color. So again, I like to see as much as I can. Just like on our field map, we looked at revenue and we looked at company count for each state. Over here, I want to see revenue for size, and I also want to see their rank for their growth for color. So I can see, okay, are the companies with the most revenue also some of the fastest growing ones or not? So what I'm going to do is I'll take rank, I'll drag that to color, and then notice right now this looks a little bit weird because a lot of them are small. What I'm going to do is I'm going to change rank by clicking this drop down here to be a dimension instead of a measure. because now you can see over, before I did that, I'm just going to undo real quick my bar. It's looking at total rank, so it's adding up the observations. Even if I change this to average, it's not going to look right. Notice I've got 5 to 4989, which I think this one is still doing what it was supposed to do, the average rank for each company, but the slider doesn't look right. It's not showing me 1 to 5,000. And so if I change this to be a dimension where it's not trying to treat rank as a number anymore, it's just treating it as like a label, like a name, now the bar looks how it should. And yeah, so now I can start to look at, okay, here's a big circle and it's a dark circle, meaning that while this company has a lot of revenue, it's one of the slowest growing companies. Also, maybe I want to flip that. Right now, darkest means least growth of the top 5,000 fastest. It's number 5,000 on the 5,000 fastest. I might want to flip that where darker means higher ranked. So if I double click on that bar over here for this rank legend, I can change this to be reversed. Notice you can also change the color. If you don't like the blue dots, you can click on this and change it to whatever color dots you want. I'll say okay. And then now darker means higher ranked. So like here I can see, okay, this one is a big dot, lots of revenue, and growing quickly. And then however you have these, you just want to have some sort of explanation to your viewer about that. Okay. And then the last thing before we put these together onto a dashboard is when we make this dashboard, I want to show you guys some simple actions we can do. And one of those actions I want to show is going to include a list of like top 5 and bottom 5 that's dynamic, that changes based on which state we're interacting with. And so we need to make a top 5 and bottom 5 list. So if we go to our top 5 companies sheet, I just want to see a list of the top 5 companies based on revenue. And right now it's going to be overall, and then I'm going to set it up where I can see the top 5 companies by revenue from each state. So to do that, I'm just going to take company and put that, again, it doesn't really matter either in rows or columns. I'm going to do rows so that I have like a vertical list. And it's going to say, hey, you got 5,000 companies in here. Are you sure you want 5,000 rows in this table? We're going to say yes, add all of them, because we're going to filter it down to just the top 5. And then what I want to see for each of these is revenue. So again, I'll take revenue and put that into columns. Again, it thinks, ooh, you got one dimension and one measure. Let's make a bar graph. That's not what I want. I'm going to go back to show me here, and I'm going to click this top left option for a text table to see just a table of the revenue per company. And so now if I want to see the top 5, I need to make what's called a set. And so to make a set, we have to start on a blue pill, on a categorical variable. Because what I'm going to say is I want to see the top 5 what? Well, I want to see the top 5 companies based on some numeric thing, in this case revenue. So I start with, I want to see the top 5 what? Well, companies. And so I'm going to go to company name, click the drop down for it. I'm going to go to create and then set. And I'll just call this something like top 5 companies. And then I'm going to go to this tab that says top, and we're going to say by field. I wanted to see the top 5, so I'm going to change that 10 to a 5. And by revenue summed. That's perfect. If I had average revenue in this table, I would change this to average. But just note that I could see the top 5 based on something other than this table. Again, I could see the top 5 company revenues based on, or I could see the revenue for the top 5 growth companies or something like that. So like I could do growth in here. It doesn't have to be the same thing that's in the table. And then I can say okay. And then what I'm going to do is take that top 5, I'm going to drag it to filters. Now here's just my top 5 companies, and it might make sense to sort those where the highest is at the top. Now, rather than recreate all this stuff to make a bottom 5, I'm just going to duplicate this sheet and change the set. And notice that the set icon is this little Venn diagram sort of icon. So if I go down here to my top 5 companies sheet name and right click on it on a Mac control click and say duplicate, it makes a top 5 companies 2, like a copy of it, which I'm going to rename. So if you double click on it, I can change this to be like bottom 5 companies. I like to rename it before I forget later. And then all I'm going to do is take this top 5 set out of the filter, just drag it out, and then I'm going to make a bottom 5. We're going to make it the exact same way. So I'm going to go to company name, click the drop down, go to create, set, and then I'll call this one bottom 5 companies. And then I still go to the top tab and by field, but instead of top, I'm going to say I want to see the bottom 5. And I still want to see it by revenue summed. But again, you could change that stuff. And I'll say OK. And then I need to take my bottom 5 companies set, drag that to filters, and then here's my bottom 5. And this one to me makes sense to sort where the smallest is at the top, because it's the bottom. Okay, so we've got some basic visuals made. Let's see how we can do some basic putting these together into a dashboard and make some actions and stuff. So this next sheet here, this create an exploratory dashboard, what we're going to do with this dashboard is we're going to take stuff that we've made over here and lay it out in a nice way. We can put in extra formatting, we can put in titles, you can make buttons to go to other dashboards, you can put in text to explain stuff. In our next workshop, we'll look at more advanced things that you can do with your dashboard setups. But for now, let's just look at some simple stuff we can do. So let's look at some actions real quick. So let's start with maybe I've got like my filled map. So I'm just going to take my filled map and drag it over here and drop it. And it fills the entire space. It brings this legend with it, which I don't usually like to keep the legend. I like to put in my own explanations to the viewer. So I'll go ahead and close out of that and say delete. And then notice it has this title that came with it too. You can double click on that to change the title over here. Or you could hide the title and put in text. So like I could right click on this and say hide title, and then I could put in another text box to be the title. Lots of options. But when this filled the entire page of my dashboard so far, that's because I'm on this option called tiled. Now, the difference between tiled and floating is, let's say, let me close out of this real quick. Let's say I was on floating and drag my map over. Notice now I've got this thing that I can move wherever, I can size however I want to, which sometimes that's what you want to do. But if you're trying to get things lined up or sized the same and that sort of stuff, it's a lot more of a pain because you have to go to this layout tab and make sure that stuff has the same X or Y position to be lined up and change the width and height of the box to make them the same size. And so know that this layout stuff is here and can be very helpful. You can even adjust how much spacing there is inside and outside of this box that bounds this map. Lots of stuff you can do, but most of the time being on tiled is a lot easier to make it look nice because it's got preset areas of the page that stuff's going to go to. So what I can do here is I can just take my map over, it fills the whole thing, and then I'm going to hide my title for now, and then I want to also go back to this map and hide this stuff. So I don't like seeing it there. So map options, and I'll uncheck allow pan and zoom and show view toolbar. And then I need to bring this over one more time. Some changes automatically update. Some of them you have to re-bring over the visual. And then let's say I now want to see like my top and bottom 5 underneath this. So now if I take top 5, I'm saying, okay, where do I want to put that? Left half, top half, bottom half. I want to put it in the bottom half. And then I'll resize this. It doesn't need to fill up that much space. And then same thing with bottom 5. I'll put that here next to it. One thing I can do here is notice these lists aren't filling the space allocated to them. I can go up to this drop down that says standard for the fit and say to fit entire view so that table fills the space allocated to it. And then let's look at a simple action here. So let's say I want to cursor over California and have it show me the top 5. Oh, I got top 5 twice. No, it's just the title's the same for both. This one should say bottom 5 companies. Okay. And so I'll show in a second how to make that automatically change. It's something with the way this was set up, where this isn't the sheet name as the reference. So basically what we need to do is here, instead of having this, we would say we want to insert sheet name as the reference. And then now whatever we name this sheet would be the title, and that would work over here. But it wasn't set up that way, that's why I had to rename this. Okay, so if we want to do this action, where I cursor over a state and it shows me the top 5 and bottom 5 for each state, well, to do that, I'm going to go up here to my dashboard dropdown, go to this actions option here, and there's nothing on this list yet because we haven't made any actions yet, so I'm going to go to add action. And this kind is going to be a filter. I want to filter this list specifically for Texas or California or Arizona or whatever state I've hovered over. And so I'm going to go to filter, and then the way this window works is, okay, in this top box I'm deciding, okay, what do I want to interact with? I want to interact with my filled map, so I'll keep just the filled map checked. And how I want to interact with it is I want to hover over a state. If you want to click on the state and have the filtering stay until you click on a different state, you would do select. Menu would be like a drop-down list, but I like hover. And then where do I want this filtering to happen? I want the filtering to happen on my lists here. And so I'll keep my 2 lists checked and uncheck the map. And then I'll say OK. And I'll say OK again, and at first it's not going to work. You'll see when I cursor over some of these, stuff goes away. If I cursor over Texas, there's one company that shows up, same with California. Basically what's happening right now is it's looking at the top 5 first, and then if one of those companies is in the state that I'm cursoring over, it's showing it. And so that's not what I want. I want it to show me per state. And so what you'll see is if I go back to my map now, back to my lists, my top 5 and bottom 5 lists, you'll see it's got this new filter in here, that action. And so Tableau created a specific type of filter in these called a context filter, which is going to first look at the state and then show the top 5 and bottom 5 in that state. And so what I need to do is go back to my lists, go to that action filter, click the drop down for it, and say add to context, and it grays it out. And what that means is that the map part's going to happen first before the top 5, and then it's going to look at the top 5 for that state. Same thing with bottom 5. I need to go to my action filter here and say add to context, and then now if I go back to my dashboard, it should work that when you cursor over a state, it shows you the top 5 and bottom 5 in that state. Cool, so we got an action made. In the next workshop, one thing I'll show that we could do is we could also, for example, over here on our map, we could set it up where when I cursor over one of these states in the tooltip, it shows those top 5 and bottom 5 lists. But that's a little bit more advanced using the tooltips, so I'll save that for the next workshop. But just note that there's a lot of different ways you can do the same sorts of things. What other sort of actions might I want to see? So let's make another dashboard here. So if you go look over here to the bottom right, you'll see there's 3 new things we can make. There's new worksheet, new dashboard, new story. So worksheet is like these things where we're making one visual at a time. A dashboard is like this sort of thing that we were on where you can put multiple visuals together. And then a story, you can combine multiple dashboards or basic visuals into a sequence, kind of like a PowerPoint deck almost. So I clicked that make new dashboard. It made this dashboard 5 over here. I'm just going to drag that over here next to my other one. Notice this one's sized a little differently to start with. If you want to change the sizing of these things in this size drop down here, you can manually type in sizes. If you click on this thing that says range in fixed size, you can type in a range. Or if you go to custom, you'll see there's these preset sizes right here of dashboards as well. So what size do we have on this one? This one was 1000 by 800. So I'll just make this one 1000 by 800 as well, just so it's the same size. Okay, we've got that dashboard. And with this one, let's show what a highlight action looks like instead of a filter. So I'm going to take my bar graph, I'll put that in here, and then I'll take my scatter plot, and I'll put that in the bottom half, and I'll make the scatter plot a little bit shorter. Again, it doesn't really matter how you lay this out. We'd probably make a taller dashboard to make these things fit better. Let's try making this like 1100 or something. But yeah, I basically don't want this to have to scroll. Now I can't see it as well. It's up to you kind of what you think looks best. So if we want to do a highlight, why might we want to do that? Well, so let's look at the difference. If I did a filter where I cursor over one of these bars, it's going to only show me the dots on the scatter plot associated with, for example, retail or construction or whatever I cursor over. If I do a highlight, what it's going to do is it's going to gray out everything not in that industry and then keep the ones in that industry blue, so I can still see the overall pattern behind it and how that industry compares. And so let's go to Dashboard, Actions, and for this one, we're going to do a highlight action. I'm again going to do a hover. I want to hover over the bar graph, so I'll keep bar graph checked. And then I want to see this highlighting happen on the scatter plot, so I'll keep that one checked. I'll say OK. And then now I'll see if I cursor over these, it's highlighting specifically the dots associated with that industry. And where this can be really powerful is if we have a trend line on our scatter plot here. So let's go back to our scatter plot and let's add a trend line to it. So if I go to my Analytics tab here, so right next to data that has my variables on it, there's this Analytics tab where you can add all sorts of different things to your visuals. Let's just add a trend line, and I'll just do a linear trend line. So all I'm doing is I'm dragging trend line over here, dropping it on linear, and it puts in a linear trend line. If you wanted to change that, you can click on the line, go to edit, and then you can change it to be all these different types of trend lines. If you click on it and go to format, you can edit all sorts of things about the line. And if you go to this describe trend line, it shows you the stats about it. There's a lot of stuff you can do with a trend line. So now that we've put a trend line on there, let's go back to our dashboard and let's see what happens when we highlight. So notice now it shows me the trend line for the overall data as well as the trend line for that industry I'm cursored over. And how this can be really nice is, so notice the slope for the energy industry is much steeper. Well, what does that mean? We're looking at revenue per worker here. It means that as the energy industry companies are adding a worker, the addition of that worker is generating more revenue than the average company in the data set, because this line's much steeper than the overall. If I find one like this, so human resources, notice that one is a shallower line. It's saying that adding a worker in the human resources industry generates less revenue for the company than the average for the overall data set. And so this is another really nice way to pick out patterns, especially when we're using the trend lines. So that's kind of how those basic actions work. You might have seen that there's other types of actions in here as well. So go to URL makes it where you can have like a button that goes to a website. You see this a lot with making resumes in Tableau, where you can like click on a LinkedIn logo and it takes you to the LinkedIn of that person or that sort of thing. Go to Sheet, you can use to navigate between dashboards. Like, for example, I could have these two different dashboards that we made and have a button that goes between them. That would be this go to Sheet. And then change parameter and set values. I don't use very much, but they're more advanced than what we want to talk about here. Other quick things I'll talk about with dashboards is, so we've seen how to add stuff here and do actions. Just keep in mind you can also do stuff like text. So again, if we didn't want to see these titles, you could double click on them and type a new title, but you can also bring in text. So like maybe I want to hide these titles, and then maybe I want to bring in some text at the top where I would type in the title. So I might do like I don't know. I'll just say title for now, and you can think of whatever title you'd want here. And then I might want to make this thing centered and bold and underlined and bigger font and so on. And then make this smaller so you can put a title for your whole dashboard if you want. You could also use this. You could do like floating, for example, and put in a text box here where you could say something like hover over a bar to highlight that industry on the Scatterplot. Don't assume that people know how to use your visual. You want to put in these sort of notes and stuff to them so that they know. And so then I'd want to format all this more and make it look nice and stuff, but you can use floating or something to put in notes to the viewer. Okay. I think, again, there's a lot that you can do. I think for getting started with a basic Tableau, that's a good place to start. Now, the last thing I wanted to show with this one is how you can get ideas, because there's a million ways you can display a certain type of data or lay it out or what have you. And so if you go to just Tableau Public, if I just Googled Tableau Public and click the first link, if I go to this Discover, you can see like a visual of the day, you can see visuals that are trending, you can look at certain authors, you can look at like business or news and events or public sector, whatever types of dashboards you're trying to make, and get ideas. And so notice like something like this. Some of this we could already make. So a bar graph, this one has some extra stuff on it other than what we had. They've got a bar graph sort of thing down here. They've added in some graphics that they've brought in. They've got some maps here. But notice a lot of this, like, we could make one of these donut wheels pretty easily. It's really just the same as a pie chart. This one might be a graphic that they made in another program. But so some of the stuff on these things are pretty basic. Some of them are more complex. And you can go through all these different dashboards and look for, how would they have made that? Notice this one, there's a lot going on here, but each of these things, again, aren't too hard to make. We've got a dot map here. They've done a pie chart as the dots, which is a little bit more complex. They've got some bar graphs. They've just spent more time with doing the layout and the formatting and changing colors and that sort of thing. Now, a nice thing with these is a lot of them you can download. If it has this icon up here in the top right, you can download this as a Tableau workbook, and then you can open it and you can try and figure out how they made that thing. So if I open this one, not all of them let you download them, but a lot do. You'll see that when I first download this, once it finishes loading, it's only going to show me that dashboard. But if I right click on that dashboard and say unhide all sheets, it'll then show me, once it finishes thinking, all the different sheets that went into making this. So they had a sheet just for this icon. They had a sheet just for this tooltip here when you cursor over one of these things. But basically, you could find like one of the visuals that they made, like this one here, and there's a lot going on, yes, but you can start to figure out, okay, maybe how did they make that? So just keep in mind that that's something you can do as well. And also something to keep in mind is with our dashboard here, once you're happy with these, if you don't want to show all the sheets that went into making them, if you right click on a dashboard and say hide sheets, it'll hide the sheets that were on that dashboard. So like it would hide the bar graph and the scatter plot for this one. And so you can get it down to just one thing that people see instead of having all the sheets visible. Okay, so let's talk about how we would save this thing. So it's a little bit different depending on the version of Tableau that you're using. So there's Tableau Desktop and Tableau Public. Tableau Desktop is normally paid for unless you're a student or teacher and have a license from Tableau for it. Tableau Public is free to everyone, and that's the one I'm currently in. Tableau Public does everything that Desktop does, except there's certain types of data that it won't open. But something like Excel, they're both going to do everything the same. So if you're in Tableau Public and want to save this, you'll first have needed to make a public profile. So if you went back to the Tableau Public homepage, you'd see a sign up in the top right. And so even if you've downloaded Tableau Public, you'll still need to make a profile. Or if you have Tableau Desktop, you would need to make a profile to save it to your public. So you'd say sign up, you make a profile, it's free. Then if you're using Tableau Public, the only downside really for saving is that you have to save to your online profile. You can't save this to your computer. So if you're using public, you would say file, save to Tableau Public as, you would make sure that you're signed in, so you'd log in, and then you would save it as whatever you want. So I'm not going to log in here, but you log in, you name it whatever you want, you hit save, it'll take you to your profile where that thing is saved. If you're using Tableau Desktop, if you go to File, you can just do normal save as, where it saves it to your computer, and then once you're ready to upload it, you would go to an option that I don't have up here, but it would be called Server. And then at the bottom of that Server dropdown, you cursor over Tableau Public, and then you can choose Save to Tableau Public as. Now, for Tableau Desktop, saving to Tableau Public, it usually will give you an error saying data extract required. To fix that, what you need to do is go to your data dropdown here, cursor over this data set that we're using, and you'll see an option in here called Extract Data. Just click that, or Create Data Extract. I think it says Extract Data though, something about extracting data. And then you click that, and all you do is you just click through the menus that come up. You don't have to change any settings. You just click OK, click Save, and then if you do all that, then when you go back to Server, Tableau Public, Save to Tableau Public as, it should work. The only other way that that can mess up, and this can be in Tableau Public or Desktop, is if you open Excel files into this that you don't end up using. Sometimes it asks for a data extract. And another workaround for that, since I can't extract data in Tableau Public, is if you go in here to this data dropdown, if I had multiple data sets listed down here and only one of them with a check mark next to it saying this is the data set being used, I'd want to close, so cursor over and close any that didn't have a check mark next to them, and then it should save correctly. But once you save it, it should take you to where that visual is on your profile. So like here's a visual on my profile, and then in these settings you can have it either show all sheets, or you can uncheck that to show only the sheet that you were on when you saved it. You can have it be on your profile or not. You can let people download it or not. So the gear icon is how you change those settings. And then this share icon is how you get a link that you can put on like your LinkedIn or something like that, wherever you want to share this thing to. Okay, so for the basic Tableau workshop, I think that that's everything we need to go over. The next workshop will start where this one left off. So basically with all these things created, we're now going to go in and make some of these other sheets, and I'll also show some more advanced things we can do on some of the ones that we've already created. And then I think we should be good. So thank you all for watching, and I hope that helps with getting started in Tableau.